Good afternoon. I'll be presenting the D21 voting method, which is quite in line with my previous speaker. We also make the point and argue that it makes sense for people, especially for wide audience, for mass voting, to rather than making tiny distinctions and perhaps even ranks, it is better to do the kind of approval thing. But we are going a step further. We are making approvals which are limited. So the number of approvals is limited, and it does have some advantages compared to standard approval voting, because there is the effect or some issue of the scarcity of vote which the voters have. So, so this is the topic we need in today's world. What we really need, we need to go from polarization to some consensus, to finding common language. And actually, there is no chance. We can see it in political issues all over. Now, yes, crisis of democracy. I don't think I need to explain too much. We know it all, and these are the numbers. The crisis has increased, polarization has increased, which we can see here on this second graph. This is the analysis of Swedish University of Project V Democracy. We can see how polarization has increased systematically over the last 14 years, very abruptly in pretty much all continents, all countries. Now, very good words of Larry Diamond. Notice, he talks about how we need to change the electoral incentives. They are biased, systematically biased against moderation and compromise. And I would even say, I wouldn't use the word compromise, against common sense, against common approach. They are seriously biased. What seems to be reasonable, logical, that we have democracy, that each of us has one vote to make the best choice, it's logical. It did work 100 years ago, but it doesn't work anymore now. It is seriously biased against finding a good way for society. So here is an example or an explanation how the crisis works. So imagine a situation, and it is not uncommon, that we have one candidate. Now here is the candidate one. And it may be somebody who is a populist, who just appeals to a narrow group of society. It could be 34%. And it very easily could be that all the other people, 66%, are against such a person. And yet, this first past the post voting system, each person has only one vote. It could easily happen that this minority candidate being supported by only minority could be the winner. Because what happens, as my previous speaker also talked about, is the vote splitting. We can have that the other people who vote do the so-called vote splitting. So even though maybe all the other candidates, 2, 3, and 4, might be more acceptable for the society, for example, candidate 2, even though he doesn't have first preferences so much, might be acceptable for voters of candidate 3 and 4 as well, and still is the loser. Here is a graphical example what could happen. We could have one populist, one extremist appealing to 2 people out of, or 2 groups of 2 votes out of 7 and become the winner. Even though, in case that we would allow people to use, for example, 2 votes to be able to select 2 candidates, such a person would not win at all, would not have no chance. Okay, again, this is an example of vote splitting. Now, here is the vote splitting is not only, we don't fix it if we have 2-round voting systems. What is better than first past the post? Much better is if you have 2 rounds, like for example Czech Senate, that you have a first round and 2 best go advance to the second round, or presidential elections in the Czech Republic. But still, it is not good enough. We can easily imagine, now here is a simplification, making projections left and right, extreme left, extreme right. It can be anything, okay? It's not important if it's left and right, because it's now, let's say, not very current distinction. But yes, maybe extreme progressives, extreme right, maybe extreme traditionalists, maybe a better distinction. And it could easily happen that the extremes that the candidate of the extremes win the first round and go to the second, and one of the extreme wins. And society is separated. And this is the big problem. We need to find moderation. So this is the traditional voting system, which can easily happen. And in the middle, there becomes vote splitting, so the extremes advance to the second round. And how does it solve multiple vote system? This is the heal. That's the healing algorithm, how to vote. Because what happens is, if this is in the extreme, if it's extreme left, extreme right, or extreme progressive, extreme traditionalist, all the reasonable, let's say reasonable from our point of view, moderate voters will not vote, will not use their additional votes to the extremes, and the mediocre center, let's say, will advance, will become much stronger. So this is the idea of multiple voting system. This is, I call this effect of multiple votes. Now, D21 is indeed a unique method for finding consensus. And I will tell you the definition now, and it is very simple. With D21, you vote for people, and for each voter, you can vote, you can have more votes than the number of winning candidates. That's one rule. And the second rule of D21 is that you might, it is not necessary, it's only an option, you might also have vote against. But the number of votes against must be less than or equal to half of the plus votes of the votes for. This is a generic definition. It's a parametric system. I will get soon to specific examples. But here, let's say, a simple version of D21, only one winner, and each person can vote for 3 people. We have only plus votes. The vote against, it's not the crucial one. It is only a complement. So it's so easy, right? On a ballot, official ballot, instead of choosing one name, you can choose 3. That's simple, nothing more. I'm stressing the simplicity. I might get to later because there will be some arguments that it's too complicated that you can have more votes. No, actually it's not. It's not at all. So, example again, how could a voting like that look like? Imagine that we are a group of academicians at a conference and we decide to go for a common dinner. Actually, we will have a party tonight at my premises, so you cannot vote. But this is not a theoretical example, by the way. I was presenting D21 already in 2016, I believe it was maybe 2015, in Washington, D.C. at university. And we had a game there for participants who were voting. We had application and they were voting for drink, for which we invited them. And actually, it did happen that with one vote, a drink won, and I think it was a beer, with one vote. With 2 votes, now we have multiple, we have 2 of them. You can see, actually I get back here, I explain later, but here we have different food, right? Italian, Japanese, Greece, etc. And the last is McDonald's, fast food. Now, it can easily happen that we have a lot of people, then they split their votes. Some of them want Japanese, some of them want French, and they split the votes. And just a small minority, which prefers fast food from some reason, wins. And we can see in this great example that it's most likely against the utility of the society in a very strong way. And so what helps is more votes. If we can vote for more meals or more type of food, then with multiple votes we can see that the fast food doesn't get any additional votes and there will be another winner. With the practical example that we did at a conference at Washington, we had the drinks, and the beer was the single vote winner. But when he had multiple votes, the beer already lost. But not only that, D21 has also the option of a vote against, which again is not the most important one, but it is a good complement, especially in countries where there is corruption. So a vote against, well, obviously the fast food will actually go to -1, to negative. So you can see from a winner, you get to the last place. By the way, the same happened to the practical voting in Washington. The beer, which was first with only 1 vote, became last with the vote against. So very interesting. So this is not a theoretical example. This is as even the food application might work out. Yes, so So here is the result of voting against. I will get to the minus vote later as well. So what are the key advantages of D21? You can see by definition, it is very simple. You either vote, you can have more plus votes, I call it, more up votes, and potentially you can have some vote against. It is very simple, and of course, it might not be optimal for all applications. We are not saying that a single voting system is the best for everything, certainly not. What would be a weakness for D20? Let's start with weakness, for example. Well, a weakness would be that it doesn't differentiate much in detail. So, for example, if we have experts on wine tasting voting for a group of wines, and we have few experts, then certainly D21 is probably not the best, right? We would like to give the experts the possibility of fine-tuning their decisions, their arguments. But this is not the case in political voting, and that's the point. In vote, and I dare to say very boldly, that in situation when we have many people voting on general subjects, for example, political elections, for example, presidential elections, that D21, I dare to say, is the best of voting systems for this type of voting, for mass voting. So, yeah, so we will, and the point is that even though D21 might not be absolutely the best in each category, it is universally very good. That's the main point. It doesn't have weaknesses. I dare to say that, actually. And let me say that, again, maybe a little bit bold statement, and I already have said it at several presentations. I don't see any weakness of D21 if we have only plus votes. If we have the version of D21 where you can also vote against, then you can find specific political situation where it would not be desired. But only for plus votes, I don't see, and I haven't found for many years, and nobody else has, weakness of D21 with the plus votes only. So first, let me go through the 5 topics and explain why it makes sense. So first of all, we have certainly verified many times for a long time, for a long history, about participation, how participation is, how people are motivated to participate. Let me maybe say, I forgot to say a little bit about history. When was D21 created? In 2011, I started the anti-corruption endowment here in the Czech Republic. It was a very strong, it was not easy, and you can imagine there were a lot of issues. Nevertheless, the anti-corruption endowment, by the way, the director of the anti-corruption endowment is here among us. So it has been very successful for saving money of my country. Nevertheless, shortly after I started it, I realized, after communicating to members of parliament and other politicians, I realized that the issue, the weakness, is, or that the corruption is a consequence of the system that doesn't work. That we should be thinking about how we elect people, what people are leading our country, that this is the issue. And this is why I started to think about voting system, because the Czech voting system is very much pro-corruption. I won't be explaining why, but it is like that. And I came up with the voting system against corruption based on the minus zones. And the original voting system in 2012, which I designed in January 2012, was 2-seat voting districts, 2 plus votes. You can vote for 2 people win per voting district, and 1 minus vote against. And this is very strong tool against corruption. But then, a year later, for some reasons, I extended it, and D21 came on the scene in spring 2013 with the definition that each voter has more plus votes than the winning candidates. And this is the idea, this is what I call effect of multiples. This is the point that supports sincere voting, participation, consensus. So participation is one of the applications. We have applied D21. Few years later, widely in the Czech Republic, Slovak Republic, also in the United States for participation. Now, we have also this paper from 2019 shows the impact of D21 on participating project, how people are engaged compared to other voting system. You can see this is a very significant difference, right? Less than 5% compared to 6.7% with D21 or slightly modified D21. Ranked choice voting. This is a paper not related to D21. It talks about ranked choice voting, and I will talk a little bit more about ranked choice voting later. I'm not a proponent of ranked choice voting, by the way. But nevertheless, even for ranked choice voting, where there's multiple, where you give ranks, people are much more likely to vote if they can express more, if they can express, say, the whole sentence rather than only one word. Now, sincere voting. Here is another strong argument for D21, and this is that people are motivating for sincere voting, not strategic voting. Let me explain why. We have done, or my colleagues have done also empirical analysis, and strategizing is very rare under D21 compared to other voting methods. It is true that similar could be done for approval voting. However, not anymore for approval voting, but you could have extended approval voting with +1 and -1. If you had approval voting where you can vote for or against, then the vote against changes the game completely. So with D21, there is very little strategic voting. Here, of course, this is not only for D21. This is also for, as I mentioned, for approval voting, especially if you have only plus votes. And here is some paper showing how plurality voting does not, or induce, here is a proportion of induced sincere voting. This was a game. This is test, how do you say, a game paper where people were offered money. So it was, so they were trying to make a gain, and each person got some preferred choice for which he or she would receive most money, and other choices as well. And we could see how people were voting strategically because they knew the preferences of the group, right? So especially if you didn't have time pressure, only 60% of people would be voting sincerely. 40% would vote strategically. We can see on the graph of that. The difference, if we had time pressure, then people couldn't think about it more. But nevertheless, for approval voting, the strategic voting is much less. So, search for consensus. I believe this is the crucial, most important point, or at least one of the most important points, which we need now in today's society. We need to be able to find consensus. We need to be able to mitigate the separation of people in our society. So here we can have like some theoretical background on the types of candidates. So the candidate on top left, we call it popular candidate. Such a candidate has many supporters, primary supporters, and few people that really dislike such a candidate. It is likely that such a candidate is going to win. In fact, such a candidate, if there are no more, if it's only popular candidate, will win under any voting system. Okay? Then we might have an unpopular candidate, very few supporters, and very many who dislike him or her. That's likely to lose. But then we have a polarizing candidate, and here is the important point. We might have a polarizing candidate or medium candidate. Polarizing candidate is such that he or she has many voters who support her as a first choice, but many people who are also strongly against. And that's the separation of society. And other things being equal, we could argue that it might be much better to have so-called medium candidate who might not be that many supporters for her first place, but for whom she is acceptable as a second or third choice. So that's the medium candidate. Now, I will show you a practical example how it applied to the Czech politics in presidential elections, the last ones, and before I will talk previous presidential elections, which are even more interesting from this point of view. So here, Petr Pavel, our current president, he is certainly a popular candidate. He doesn't have many people who would be strongly against him. Example of unpopular candidate would be another Mr. Basta. We could call polarizing candidate Mr. Babiš, who is most likely going to win to the parliamentary elections in 2 weeks. So he has many supporters, and he has many, probably even more people who are strongly against him. And medium candidate who could be, for example, Mr. Fischer. Now, how were the elections in the Czech Republic? This was a poll with representative sample. We can see this with one vote only, Petr Pavel is still going to win. Nevertheless, he is closely behind by Andrej Babiš. Remember, Petr Pavel is the popular candidate, Andrej Babiš is a polarizing candidate. And it would be, in a sense, we could argue it would be very unfortunate if these numbers were, instead of 33 and 31, if they were 31 and 33, and the polarizing candidate would have won. That would have been a problem. In practical elections, the first two went to second round, and Petr Pavel won with a significantly high percentage. So here you have the other candidates. Now, first past the post voting system here gives the okay result. By chance, it's 33 to 31. But how would it look like with D21? D21 having second and third vote against. So here are the results of the poll. You can see Petr Pavel increased further, another consensual candidate came in, and Mr. Babiš significantly dropped to third place. And yet, if we add a vote against, as an option of D21, 3 plus 1 minus 1, wow. Mr. Babiš, as a polarizing candidate, goes pretty much to zero. So what I was explaining in theoretical terms, this is a practical example how it worked in practice with a representative poll sample. And now even more interesting example, presidential elections 2018. Our president was Miloš Zeman, very controversial candidate. He was the first, yes. This would be the result of the first past the post voting system, only one won. In our case, Zeman and Draž went to second round and Zeman won by a tiny margin. Now, how would that look like with D21, with second and third vote? Okay, here we go. Look, Mr. Zeman, as a polarizing candidate, he didn't get many, he got very few second and third votes, unlike Mr. Drahoš or unlike even other candidates. Okay? And if we can go even further with minus vote, well, look, Mr. Zeman dropped all the way almost to zero again because he attracted the votes against. So he would be, he would have no chance. So this was a search for consensus, and this is the crucial element of D21, the effect of multiple votes. Giving higher chance, giving power to people who are consensual, who want to unite society, whose strategy is not to attract 30% of people and for others to hate him. This is important. Uniting society, not separating. Now, D21 is very simple, as I already have argued. I will go through it quickly. You have official ballot, and you can see, you can fill in, instead of one, you can fill in 3 boxes because you can vote for 3 people. Of course, 1 vote per 1 person. We have done analysis of invalid votes, how it will look like in practice. You can see that D21 without minus vote has actually lower invalid votes than first past the post. So the simplest one, where you have 1 vote per 1 candidate, has more errors than D21. Why is that? Well, apparently, in the first past the post, if somebody by accident makes 2 crosses, it's invalid. With D21, such a vote is not invalid. So without the minus vote, D21 is has practically very little errors. Approval voting is even better in that sense. With approval voting, you can do anything. You can cross as much as you want. D21 with minus vote has slightly higher error rate. The reason being that the number of minus votes must be less than or equal to half of the plus votes, which some people might not satisfy. Instant runoff, by the way, the ranked choice voting, huge errors. Okay. Now here is a table where simply 0, 1, good or bad, for different characteristics of the voting system. As you can see, D21 with plus vote is acceptable under all criteria, as is approval voting. As is here first past the post, because it's the simple one. The more complicated voting systems are usually problematic in many issues, like, for example, voter education, to understand how it really works. Instant runoff is, in that sense, more complicated. Now, D21 has another good advantages. It is an opportunity for small parties and independent candidates. And I will show you in a moment why. The reason being is that with multiple votes, you don't need to do strategic voting, and you can vote for somebody who you really like, even though the candidate is perhaps unknown or has no chance. But such a candidate, if he or she is interesting, may attract the additional votes and may become actually quite successful, or maybe may show his or her strengths for next, for example, next votes. So here's an example. Slovakian elections, again presidential elections in Slovakia. In 24 last year. So we can see the first votes only, the preferences. And as soon as we get D21 with multiple votes, you can see how somebody like Jan Kubiš, who had only 1.7%, became so popular, got so many second and third votes. Now, he would not have won, but nevertheless, going from 1.7% to 27 or to that much is very strong. And for this candidate, it may be great support for next elections. Yeah? So we have more innovation in democracy with D21. Mm-hmm. Now, let me share with you what I consider to be the optimal version of D21 for parliamentary elections. Now, I don't have proof for that. We could not, unlike the previous one with one winner, we could do ballot, we could do testing in practice in presidential election. We cannot do that for 2-seat voting districts, obviously, because it's not in practice. But nevertheless, the logic stands behind. What we consider to be the optimal version for D20 for parliamentary elections is 2-seat voting districts, so 2 people win per voting districts, and each voter having more than 2 plus votes. That's the definition. In fact, it would be 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 plus votes, and as an option, as a good option, 1 minus vote, voting against one person. Let me revert, actually, I said optimal for parliamentary elections under usual assumptions in countries like Czech Republic. Not always. There would be a theoretical weakness of D21 with minus vote. If we imagine a country which where may, for example, religious separation, and there might be a religious minority, it could easily happen that the candidate of such a religious minority would be systematically attracting the minus votes of the majority. So there are application examples where D21 with the minus vote is not optimal, and we might want to use only D21 without the minus vote. So 2-seat voting districts and 4 plus votes. By the way, why is this also so good? Imagine that you are voting in such a situation. You are motivating to learn more about your candidates, right? Because you have assets, you have your 5 votes. and which you can decide to whom to give them. It's not just voting for one person. So people are motivating to learn more about the political system, about the candidates. And now you have your assets, which are the 4 votes, and you think how to distribute them against the candidates. You might have a preference for your party. You give 2 votes to the 2 candidates of your preferred party. Each party will nominate 1 or 2 candidates. It makes no sense to nominate more because there are only 2 seats. So you give your perhaps 2 votes, and then you have 3rd and 4th vote. So you freely decide, okay, with my 4th vote, what will I do? This candidate is completely new. It's some, I don't know, physicist or economist. I don't know him, but he is interesting. I like him. I might give him my 3rd or 4th vote. And if such a person is appealing for enough people, there might be a surprise. We might have an independent candidate coming from a 2nd place to make it to the parliament. Yeah, so this is the opportunity for independent candidates, for small parties, if it is or let's say a person who is inspiring people. So, ultimate version of D21 for the parliament. We do not want only 1 winner. We want 2 winners. It's much better. In fact, by the way, there might be a theory. Should we have only 1 president? Yeah, there could be even theories that we might want to have 2 people as the president of the country. But there's another steps behind. But at least for the parliament, I believe that this is a much better way to go. No, like for the Czech Senate, for example. For Czech Parliament, we have proportional system, which is another story. But for the Czech Senate, we have 1 winner per voting districts. It would have been much better to have 2 winners and more plus votes. Now, last but not least, positive campaigning. Again, such a strong asset against separating society. Imagine now that we are in presidential elections, there is only 1 winner. How will a serious campaign of a serious candidate look like? If a candidate wants to win, will he throw hatred against the others, blame them and badmouth them and stuff like that? Yes, with first past the post voting system, but certainly not with D21. Why? Well, obviously, it is extremely unlikely that there will be somebody who would have more than 50% in separating society. A good winner, a serious candidate that wants to win presidential elections with D21 must be able to appeal also for 2nd and 3rd votes of people. So he or she must be consensual. So how will a presidential campaign look like? Well, if I were to be candidate, I would say, yes, this is my program, and I like also the points of the program of my opponents. I like this one specific for candidate. I like this one. This is very good. I have it, of course, even better, right? From candidate B, I like this point, etc., etc. Because candidates would like to attract also the primary voters of other candidates to have a chance. They must become consensual, and this will happen already in the campaign. So we can see a political campaign will be, hopefully, will be positive and might even be constructive, right? Because we are competing with programs, and the communication, the positive communication, might be able to even expand further the program and improve the situation. So this is the positive campaigning. Here are some rigorous data. From paper studies. This was comparison. This was comparing voting in some cities in the U.S. Comparing current voting with previous standard voting for preferential versus plurality. And so this is not about D21, but this is the general thing with multiple votes. You can see that people perceive the voting with preferential with more votes. Preferential in this case is equivalent to more votes, as being less negative, either at least a little or even a lot less negative. So this is very positive that we might improve our campaigns. Here is same paper with predictive probability of campaign tone, how people perceive the campaign tone. Again, with plurality, we have much better campaign tone. Candidates do not with preferential candidates do not criticize so much. Yeah, most people, only few people think candidates criticize. And again, how people were satisfied. People were much more satisfied when they could say the whole sentence, not just one word. And this is not about D21. Again, this is preferential voting. So here are I wrapped up the important aspects why D21 is very good. And here, as a final last slide, I will, or last two slides, I will just a little bit more about comparison of voting system. What is democracy? Democracy is that we have all equal voting rights. So, first past the post, one vote, one person is logical, it makes sense, it is democracy. But unfortunately, it doesn't work very well, it's a pre-society. I would say it was version 1.0 of democracy. It worked 100 years or 50 years ago perhaps as well. It doesn't work anymore now. We could argue that the proportional voting system like in Europe is probably better than the majority one winner voting in for example, Great Britain or United States. So it would be a little bit version 1.2, probably on average, I would say, a slight improvement. And then we might have STV, single transfer vote, or in general, ranked choice voting, which is often, which is in practice, what is applied is instant runoff voting, which is, by the way, in the states of Maine, in the United States, and also since 2025, all elections in District of Columbia are instant runoff, which is the, so instant runoff, not single transfer vote, but doesn't matter, the ranked choice voting. It is an improvement, a significant improvement, indeed. It is multiple votes. Nevertheless, I would like to argue that if we were to take ranked choice voting, multiple votes, more complicated systems, and it's a paradox of human society. Instant runoff or single transfer vote, the difference is there is one winner or more winners, is the worst choice, or one of the worst choices that we could make. And these are the more, the complicated system applied in practice, instant runoff, is the worst one. Why is that? We don't have much time, but let me just say the logic. The logic, the way it works, that you make a rank, and conditional for, you count, there is no winner, you take the votes, you take the people who voted for the weakest candidates, for the last ones, you erase them, and you take the second choice of such a person who voted for the last candidate. Speaking mathematically, for those people who voted, in some sense, on average, the worst, they voted for the weakest candidates, we take into account their second choice. But not for those people who wanted reasonable candidates. So this is a total logical inconsistency in instant runoff voting, and this is absurd to me. That is one it is being applied in practice. It just doesn't make any sense. So I argue that STV or instant runoff voting is the worst of the multiple voting system. Then there is D21, and then we make an upgrade. Upgrade from DOS to Windows. Upgrade to totally new operating system, and this is D21 version 2.1. So thank you so much for your attendance, and once more the word that I already have said, with one vote you can only express one word, with multiple votes you can express a whole sentence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Karel, for this introducing of D21 and its basic building blocks. And we have time for a few questions. And the first one is Eric Heinze here.
Karel, thank you very much. There was one thing that you didn't mention, and I'm quite curious about, is coalitions. Right, because, I mean, right, obviously in Britain, first past the post has a lot of the discontents that you've articulated, and many people would like to see this reformed. On the other hand, if you look at countries like Italy or the Netherlands, coalitions have not always worked well. They've been often destabilizing and again created polarization, actually, even though it seems to correspond to principles of greater proportionality, right, and greater representation, and yet it's also been very polarizing, at least in recent years, and more in Italy, actually, going back even further. But the Netherlands, I think, has had a very unfortunate experience.
Czech Republic as well.
Yeah.
So the proportional system is not fixing polarization. It probably, if you look at history, it is probably has been a little better than the polarization of the majority system, but especially now it's becoming worse and worse. And it is about political parties. And I mean, this will be for a longer discussion, but I believe that the system of primary political parties, voting for political parties, is very obsolete. That the future is voting for people. I didn't stress that. That's, of course, another advantage of D21, that we vote for specific people. They might be nominated by political parties, but we vote for people. This is important. That's a big distinction. If we make the political parties, when society is separated, it becomes totally wrong. Like here in the Czech Republic, we have elections, as I said, 2 weeks, and it's just terrible. so yeah, thank you for the question.
So I'm risking for not being invited in the future, but I really do like the idea of giving people more votes, so which gives the chance to parties or candidates that are not voted for because the people are afraid that they will lose their vote, which is, I think it's great. But I really think that the negative vote is total disaster, because if example, if there are 4 parties, 2 are moderate right and moderate left, 30% each, and there are 2 extreme parties, 20% each, extreme left, extreme right, then moderate right will vote out the extreme left, moderate left will vote out extreme right, and then 40% of people will not be represented at all, and they will be angry. And then it would mean in the future that maybe the moderate party will try to attract those extreme people because they will not disappear, and it will be very bad, I think. And with the presidential example, it's another thing. So there are people like there is this candidate A that is less polarizing. There is the candidate B which is more popular but more polarizing, and then there is a third candidate that's like mediocre. But if the second candidate would not be as much polarizing, probably most people will give the negative voice to the third candidate. So in the end, because those 2 first candidates will focus on each other or their voters, they will kind of forget the third candidate, which nobody likes, and then he will be president. With case of Danuše Nerudová, it would be exactly this. I bet that majority of the population would not want her as a president.
Thank you. Of course, as I said, there is, you can construct examples where there is a weakness of D21 with the minus vote, in line what you said. In fact, however, for the big advantage of the minus, that's why how D21 originally D21 was created to go against corruption. And in my paper, there is a section, game theory argument, how the vote against works so much against corruption. So under very good assumptions. But nevertheless, yes, I agree, there could be undesired effects. Nevertheless, what I said about 2-seat voting district, here, look, we have 4+ votes and we have only 1 vote against. Yeah? So it is important, so this ratio is also important. The 2-to-1 would be optimal against corruption under some assumptions. In practice, it would be better to have like 4-to-1, so this effect will mitigate. And yeah, but if there is somebody who is so polarizing that he accepts all minor, let be it. It is possible. Yeah, I cannot. This would be a long discussion. We could look at separate example, different setup preference, and look at it. Nevertheless, I would still argue that for Parliament, perhaps even better from the presidential elections. For presidential elections, I'm inclined to say yes, we should probably, in most cases, have only the plus votes. 1 winner, 3+ votes, but that's the important, the effect of it is there. That's there. And the minus vote is an option, which I believe has good effect in parliamentary elections, especially because it can point out the candidates which are corrupt. We had that. This is an example in. Like 10 years ago, it was an issue a lot, and we could see how people who public knew they were corrupt, but they were just on the first place of the candidate list of a political party, and nobody could do anything about that. And people would be just upset that the corruptor is there and that he is in the parliament. Yeah. But yes, thank you for the comment.
Thank you very much for very illuminating presentation, which is more food for thought than leading to some final conclusions. My view is that every electoral system has its advantages and disadvantages. Proportional representation vis-a-vis majority voting and majority voting, 1 round, 2 rounds, each has some advantages, disadvantages. 1 round majority system, there is a clear-cut choice. Clear-cut choice. You must choose. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make sense to be the third in the first round choice. 2 rounds majority voting system, it supports centrists, and so on. So the question is what we want. Do we want a real a struggle of political positions in our parliament, or do we want to have something like a moderation consensus, which means that establishment will be alienated sooner or later from sentiments of the voters. But it seems to me that the final bottom line should be that if most of voters are either stupid or evil, no electoral system could bring us good results.
Certainly, your last answer is, of course. If more than 50 of voters are totally stupid, voting nonsense, then it doesn't work. Then we failed the let's say test of evolution, and as a human species, maybe we won't make it. I do believe that this is not the case. That people are in fact, even much smarter than it looks like. And we take, for example, the case of misinformation. Right? People are much smarter, and it is only being abused by the political parties that we must fight against misinformation because people are stupid, etc. No, people get experience. And yes, they might be stupid once, make a mistake, but for a second time, many of them will learn. So in the end, we must give a trust to our consciousness that we will be able to make it. Of course, if we cannot make it, then nothing works. But the point being that if we have a bad voting system like first past the post or even proportional with the 5%, etc., a situation, a setup of society, certain setup may fail, which would not fail and could progress with D21. So there is a wide interval of, let's say, social setup of social coherence, which make it with a good rules, reasonable rules like D21, and do not make it with others, with the bad ones. So.
Okay, thank you, Karel, very much.
So, thank you so much.